Dr. Elisabeth Ormandy holds an undergraduate honors degree in neuroscience and a master's degree in applied animal behavior and welfare, both from the University of Edinburgh. Elisabeth now lives a low-impact life in Vancouver. She's an instructor at UBC and advisor for both the Canadian Centre for Alternatives to Animal Methods and the Humane Education Coalition. She's a member of the editorial board for the Alternatives to Laboratory Animals Journal. And today, Elisabeth has agreed to speak with us as the Executive Director of Animals in Science Policy Institute, which is the very first and currently only registered charity in Canada that's specifically working to promote better science without animals. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Elisabeth.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for the invite.
It's awesome. And I'm really interested to know about your personal journey that led you to help create the Animals in Science Policy Institute in, was it 2015?
Yeah, you got it right for sure. It's a pretty long personal journey, honestly. Like, I started out as a neuroscientist, and that's what my undergraduate degree is in. And so I was exposed to all kinds of different types of neuroscience related animal research that never really sat quite right with me for a variety of reasons that I couldn't articulate at the time. And I then kind of pivoted in my career to learn more about animal welfare and how to improve the lives of animals. And that's my master's degree, like animal behavior and welfare. And then I kind of leaned more heavily into that path. I came to Canada, to Vancouver. I did my PhD in the animal welfare program at the University of British Columbia. And even though I was in the animal welfare program, my own PhD research was more on animal ethics and policy and how we govern the use of animals in science. So I was using my, my neuroscience background. And so when I think about how to create ethical policy for the use of, or policy rather for the ethical use of animals in science, a lot of my current perspectives have been shaped by that work, by feeling like our current policies don't do enough to protect animals. And there are so many cases in which we don't need animals in the first place. And so, yeah, so that's, when it came to, I did a postdoc at the University of British Columbia in the same program in 2012 to 2014. I got a postdoc grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, but then decided that academia wasn't really sitting right with me, and I wanted to have more of an impact in the world. And as part of my PhD program, I went to work for the Canadian Council on Animal Care, who are our national agency that are responsible for developing guidelines for the use of animals in science and science education. And I remember speaking to my boss there and saying, like, she was also from the UK, and I remember saying, in the UK there are a number of charities, registered charities, that do very strong government relations work to advocate for animals in science specifically. So there is the Fund for the Replacement of Animals in Medical Experiments. The RSPCA has a research animals department, which is a small team of people who are all PhD holders in scientific disciplines. There's the National Centre for the 3 Rs. There's Animal Free Research UK. So there's all these charities that are doing this really good work and actually influencing policy and law in really meaningful ways. And I was like, where are our Canadian organizations that hold that same political space? We have amazing animal rights activists in Canada. We have people who are anti-vivisection organization founders, members, all the rest. But from my experience working in policy for Canada, those individuals, those groups are so easily dismissed as non-credible, as radical. And I was really, really craving an organization that actually could make policymakers listen. by also hearing them too, but to occupy just a little bit of a different space that's perhaps less activist, but still advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, that this little germ seed like got planted in my brain around that time of working for CCAC. So I worked for them between 2009 2011, and then it kind of just germinated from there. And in 2015, the right people came together at the right time, and we pitched a grant application idea to Lush Cosmetics. So big shout out to them. They have an amazing charity pot program. We pitched them our idea, and they have been so good to us. Like, we literally would not exist without that seed money to found as a nonprofit. And then in 2017, we applied for charitable status to get registered as a charity and be able to give tax receipts and all of those fun things that come with being a charity. And so, yeah, that's how it all started, really, by identifying that gap and seeing that while there is some really strong animal advocacy and activism for lab animals in Canada, we were missing an organization that could engage in the policy world and not be considered illegitimate wrongfully, but
Mm-hmm.
we were hoping to just, like, you know, build this science-based organization that could tap into that gap.
So it seems like you're working to kind of bridge the gap between the activism work that's going on and what the government's putting into legislation, which sounds like there's not a lot of that. Is that right? So you're maybe bringing some of the research that and the information that the activists are finding to government. So you meet directly with government officials, that sort of thing?
So the first thing to note is that there is no national legislation for the use of animals in science in Canada, period. So there's no government officials that we can meet with to leverage change to laws, because there are none. But we are engaged with CCAC, in ways that hopefully are meaningful moving forward. The danger with, or the not danger, that's the wrong word, the thing about the use of animals in science is that data is so lacking that there's actually there's only so far that activists who are not kind of in the inside can have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not so much that we lean on research from activists. That's not really anything that we do actively. Arguments, yes, but not research, just because they don't have access to the data or things like that. And so the research that we do is generally kind of if we do any analysis of data from CCAC, which is public, and you know, everyone has access to that, but we'll do our own analysis of that. And because I've worked for them, I have like insights into what that data means.
Mm-hmm, right.
As a scientist, I have some insights into, like, when we think about certain lab settings or field research or agricultural research, I've got some kind of firsthand experience of what that is like. And so that's the kind of lived experiences that I can bring to the table. And the same is true of my board members.
Well, Elisabeth, that's a little bit shocking to learn that there is no legislation for animals in labs or animals in schools. And so you're saying that in the UK and I guess other countries, there might be a branch of government, there might be a ministry that you could actually go to and lobby, but we have nothing like that in Canada?
No, the only province that has an actual law specific to the use of animals in research is Ontario, and they have the Animals in Research Act, I believe it's called, but there's no other provincial law and there's no federal law in Canada. What we do have is the CCAC, who create guidelines, and you know, to be fair to them, they're wildly imperfect, but to be fair to them, when the CCAC were created back in the late 1960s, the system was okay. You know, it worked. Guidelines were created. It was a very much a liaison relationship with researchers. However, you know, we're now in 2020 and we have a system that is, it's lacking in transparency. Not every animal facility in the country is covered by CCAC as a guidelines and inspectorate organization, which I can explain why if you want to. But there are some facilities out there that are not publicly funded and they have no obligation to be under CCAC guidelines or rules. And so our system is lacking in accountability.
Okay.
So yeah, you're exactly right. There are no government officials that we can there's no ministry that is overseeing this particular aspect of animal use. And it's, you know, I will say that the use of animals in science is not unique in that respect. Like, there's no meaningful legislation for lots of different types of animal use. So in Canada. So yeah, but you know, my wheelhouse is the use of animals in science. Like I said, I come from the UK. We have the Animals Scientific Procedures Act that has been in existence under that name since 1876. And it got revised in 1986 and then again 2013. And again, like the UK is now obviously has gone through Brexit and is no longer part of the EU, but the EU has their EU Directive, which is a legally binding directive for all EU member countries, which is also speaks to kind of a legislative nature of guidelines or laws for how we use animals in science. What I will say is that the EU directive in Article 10 is very clear that the replacement of animals in science is the ultimate goal, which is very progressive language. And so because of that, I believe that because of that kind of legal directive, there's a lot more incentivization for research and development for non-animal methods in the EU. And there's a lot of progress being made there. A lot of political decision-making. So the Netherlands have said that they're going to ban many forms of animal testing by 2025. The deadline might be kind of, you know, they might be pushed back a little, but at least there's a commitment being made. Mm-hmm. So yeah, unfortunately in Canada, there's no such top-down stuff happening really in any kind of super meaningful way.
Right. So in the Netherlands, they have people talking about it and looking at it and what's needed and what could change and when and how to implement. Sounds like a good job creation project to me. So what kind of things should we be concerned about that are going on in science regarding animals?
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you were designing a program, what would be the first things that you would change?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. There's two things that really jump out at me, and they're very different beasts. The first thing that I think that a lot of people are unaware of is this false narrative that the use of animals for developing new drugs for human therapeutic uses is like this necessary evil. And yes, it harms animals, but you know, the trade-off is that we get to get new cancer treatments and new treatments for stroke or Alzheimer's or these diseases that are incredibly personal to us because we lose people, like we lose our loved ones because of these conditions. Mm-hmm. And so it's deeply personal. And there's this kind of, I think, commonly held perspective that, yes, I don't like animal research, but at least the benefit is there. And I think that we need to do a lot of education about the fact that that's not always true. And in many cases, it's not true. So based on the data that I know and the empirical research that I know, the average failure rate. So on average, 95% of drugs tested in animals fail in humans when they go to clinical trial. Mm. And so that's not a percentage that speaks to the uncertainty of science. That's not, well, science goes wrong often, actually, more often than people think. Like, if you're not a scientist, then I think some people think that science is this very certain endeavor, and it's not. We need to allow things to fail in science to learn things. And so it's not ever going to be the case that 100% of animal use translates into something that's beneficial. However, 95% failure rate is because our system is broken, and it's broken in a couple of ways. One is that the animals that are used in science are not held to the same value as humans, and so the scientific method is often kind of sloppy around using animals in science. Like, there are certain ways of avoiding bias in your research, and some of those methods and techniques are not being used. So it ends up that there's an overstatement of effect of a drug in animals, and then it goes to human clinical trial, and then it fails. We're also missing out on the drugs that are ineffective in animals but could be effective in humans, because animals actually just make poor models for humans. They don't get the same diseases. On the surface, we are like very genetically similar, but the way that those genes interact to form biological pathways in the body, they're often different. And so the way that a pathology of a disease unfolds in a rat body is often different to the way that it unfolds metabolically and at a cellular level in a human body. And so animals, in many cases, are just not accurate proxies for humans. So there's those two things. There's like the kind of the lack of valuing of animals, and therefore sloppy science creeps in, which is fixable, and we could tighten up our methodology, but we're never going to fix the species differences thing. We're never going to be able to fix that. Like, rats are just not humans. And so that failure, that 95% failure rate, is coming from those two things. So that's the one thing, the first thing that I would say in terms of like, you said about programs. I think that getting that information out and solving the translation crisis, but solving it by replacing animals, not just making our animal models quote unquote better.
What would you replace it with?
That's a really good question. So there are emerging new technologies that are coming out that use human cell-based approaches that are human relevant. So if we're doing research on human diseases and developing drugs for humans, the best target or the best way of approaching that is to use humans as our model. So there are things like organs on a chip and 3D bioprinting, the development of little spheroid cellular structures called organoids. There's also like advanced computational modeling of how drugs work in the body at the cellular and systemic level. There's something called adverse outcome pathways, which actually traces molecular events in the body so that we can piece together the puzzle of how drugs will, how diseases and drugs will work. And then you can piece together in vitro techniques to answer address the missing gaps. And I don't want to give the impression that those technologies are remotely ready at this time to, we can't replace animals in science completely tomorrow, because those technologies still need to be validated and developed. And but I will say they hold great promise. And so that's what I mean. Like, when we say replacement, I think a lot of us can make sense of like the why we would want to replace animals in science. But the how question is another one that is actually being answered by our teams of biomedical engineers and chemical engineers and all the smart people that develop these new groundbreaking technologies that do hold the promise of being able to effectively and accurately test for the effectiveness and safety of new drugs for humans. And
So,
when you,
so
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking about the COVID vaccine. How everybody wants a vaccine, and you know, the idea that a virus that we know has come from is created in an environment where animals are exploited. The idea of then exploiting animals to test a vaccine seems, you know, not the direction that we ought to be going as a species. So I'm wondering if, like, in the Netherlands, then, if there are people having these conversations and planning to move away, you know, where are these alternatives coming from, and is anybody got any of these alternatives currently in their science labs? And it seems like, you know, there's a lot of different scientists working apparently internationally, I've heard, towards a COVID vaccine. And do you know if, you know, what's going to happen with the testing of that? I've heard my brother lives in Wales, and he said that they're starting human trials. So does that mean that they've already done the animal trials? I'm sorry, I have a
Right. No. I mean, if your question is specifically about COVID-19 vaccine, what I will say is that when there are kind of global emergencies like this, the typical procedures tend to be like not proceed as normal, because we're just like really desperate to find that the one vaccine that's going to help us out of this struggle that we're currently in. The typical, even though there are lots of, you know, alternatives being used in various labs, yes, there are people that are actively using that non-animal methods that have been validated and accepted for their use at the global level by an organization called the OECD. They give like global approval for regulatory testing methods. So some of them are developed, validated, and in use. The organs on a chip and organoids and stuff, that they're not there yet. Specifically for vaccine development, a thing to remember is that as much as, you know, there are really strong scientists in the community that are champions of non-animal methods, there's also the regulatory side of things to consider. And currently in Canada, vaccines are required to be tested on animals by law, because we need to make sure that they're safe and effective. And so there are regulatory barriers to the full adoption of non-animal methods as well, because we have those regulatory requirements for testing on animals, especially for vaccine development. So I would be, I don't think it would be the case that a COVID-19 vaccine would be developed without using animals at some point.
And so the process of that then means, like with any disease, I guess, they have to actually create the disease in the animal.
Yeah,
it's just nasty. Okay, well, let's talk about some nicer things. Except I'm not sure that you were finished, because you mentioned that there are two reasons why animals aren't the best way to go for trials. And one is because it's biologically, and we're different and things run differently. I'm not sure if you were able to finish the second part.
Oh yeah, the other one was the methodology side.
Okay.
Because we don't value animals as much, we tend to scientists just are not held to the same standards for things like randomization and blinding and all the kind of like ways of doing your science that would remove any, or at least in the most part overcome confirmation bias. Or by that what I mean is, you know, we're all human, and if we're excited about our project, if we haven't blinded ourselves to treatment, we will find what we're looking for, because we just want the result so bad, right? And we're all flawed humans, and so we have scientific method and certain tactics in our science toolbox, like randomization to treatment and blinding to treatment, that help us overcome our inherent biases. And there's abundant evidence out there to show that so many animal research scientists don't use randomization and don't use blinding. And so, like I said, that's a very fixable part of this translation crisis. There's differences, not so fixable.
Okay. And it sounds like maybe one thing that is kind of fixable is your approach to working with the Canadian school system,
Yes.
where I was shocked to read on your website that 79% of teachers in BC are still doing dissections, and millions of animals are being dissected across Canada. Let's talk about how, I was talking to my friend about this actually, and mentioning that I was going to be chatting with you, and she said, you know, I refused to dissect a frog in grade 9. I failed science as a result. And so it seems like there's so many problems with this animal situation in the schools, and it's a focus of your organization, I think, right?
Absolutely, yes. So when I think about, you know, when we want to replace animals way down the line in research and testing, what do we need to do to make non-animal methods the obvious choice for people, right? Well, that speaks to our entire science culture, and we actually have it in our, I think, constitution, or our mission as an organization, which is to build an ethical culture of science that respects animal life. That's like the first motivation behind why we founded this organization. And so when I think about science culture and how that is built, it starts in our science education in schools. And I think that what happens is that, you know, and you're an education assistant, so you can probably speak to this a little bit too, that I think that there are so many students, in fact, I think it maybe is inherent in everybody, with very few exceptions, is that when you're very young, you have a natural compassion and empathy towards animals. And our science education system, starting very, very young, is asking students to put that empathy and compassion aside in the name of science. And that in the name of science, animals can then become tools. They can become these inert things that we kill, and we take them apart because scientific curiosity is asking us to shelve our sensitivity and our empathy and our compassion. And so you have students in, you know, as young as grade 5 doing like, you know, looking at animal organs, and then you get like a full frog in grade 8, and then, you know, grade 9 and 10, maybe you get a rat dissection, and then grade 12, you've got your fetal pig dissection. So frogs, rats, and fetal pigs are the 3 primary species that are used in dissections in British Columbia, at least, and I would probably wager across the country. And I think that that's, I think it's stripping students of their empathy when they're told that this is the way that we do science. And as someone who is a scientist, I never did dissection in school, not because I opted out, but because it wasn't offered to me in my UK education. It wasn't offered to me in my undergraduate neuroscience degree. And I've been an animal researcher and in my career. And like I said, like I had feelings about that and I pivoted. But in my science education, I was allowed to still be my empathetic, compassionate self and learn about animal anatomy, which was fascinating and curious to me. I wanted to be a veterinarian, so how bodies work was really, really fascinating to me. But I think that I don't just think, the data shows me that we can effectively, very effectively teach those things without using real animals. We can save schools money. Non-animal teaching methods are the greener option for our schools. Non-animal teaching methods are inherently inclusive of all different kinds of students. Whether you have mobility issues and your dexterity is lacking, non-animal methods allow different modalities of learning that will allow students with maybe dexterous issues to participate. If students learn at a slower pace, non-animal teaching methods allow people to consolidate their learning in a way that allows them to keep up with everybody else. if you are someone who's a vegan student, if you're a Jewish student, if you're a First Nation student, dissection, especially with I mentioned Jewish because if you're faced with a fetal pig dissection, that's going to be a big deal for you, right? And so we need to think about who are the young people who are in our classrooms and how can we provide inclusive educational experiences for them. And so when you're just faced with a dissection and you have no opportunity to opt out, and the burden is squarely on your shoulders as a young person to stand up to your teacher and say, even if your teacher's lovely, like the power imbalance is like the burden squarely on the student at the moment to say, I want to opt out. And a lot of students will just suck it up and do something that they're really, really uncomfortable with because they don't even know that they have a choice, right? And so because of all of that, we have spent the last 3 years developing a humane science education program. It's multifaceted. We do a lot of work in this program. We do guest classes in schools, so teachers can book us to come in and just deliver their class for them using non-animal teaching methods. And ahead of time, we're very teacher focused, so we're never like, you're doing a bad thing by doing dissection. We're basically saying, hey, if you want to teach your students most effectively, this is the clear path, not that. And we'll show you how. So rather than just saying that the burden's now on teachers to do all the research into non-animal methods to find the most cost-effective ones, we've taken on that burden. So literally teachers can call us and say, I want you to come in, I want you to teach this class. Then hopefully what happens is it's a kind of see one, do one kind of model where if we come in and do a guest class, we're not going to be coming in and doing guest classes for the same school year after year. We're going, unless the school can't afford to buy some of the non-animal alternatives. But what happens is that it's educational for teachers in the process as well. And they will, again, like, we all know, I think many of us will know why replacing animals in dissection is a valuable thing to do. But the how question is a different one to answer. And we're trying to answer both, like why and how. And the how for teachers is the most important. I literally, my morning was spent with the Surrey Teachers Association convention, and I did a workshop on the how. And so that was literally the call before this one today. And it's really cool to hear teachers' feedback, to be like, wow, I just really learned a lot today, and thank you. Like, I had no idea that all of this stuff was available to me. And so the encouraging thing so far is that the reception from teachers has been overwhelmingly positive. I think I had it in my notes. I don't have my notes in front of me, but to date, we have taught over 300 classes, and we have taught more than 2,000 students. We've done about 20 different teacher training workshops. And most importantly, for, I guess, people who might be your audience, we estimate, it's hard to get the data, but we estimate that thanks to our work, more than 5,000 animals have been replaced in dissection. As a direct result of our work, unfortunately, there's no national data or provincial data on numbers of animals used in dissection. So we can't use any existing data to track whether animal use is going down. But what we can do is say, we know that this teacher, if it wasn't for our guest class, this teacher would have ordered probably about 15 rats or however many pigs, right? And so our estimates are based on that, plus teacher interactions where we know that teachers haven't booked us for a guest class, but they've gone away and purchased things and delivered their own classes.
So great. That's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like a very small number when you just cited, there are millions, but like it's very grassrootsy, because to change culture, you need to just get in there and have individual conversations and with teachers and students. And so I'm really proud of our impact, actually.
Yeah, well, and I can imagine that's only going to grow. Those veggie vegan kids have veggie vegan parents,
Mm-hmm.
and it occurs to me that the disconnect that we're taught between the animals that we play with and the animals that we consume, and the sort of the distancing that most of us still, I think many of us have grown up with. It starts with our food, and it's extended
Mm-hmm.
by what we experience in schools often. So, there's all sorts of ways to try to protect the animals and encourage alternative behaviors, it seems to me, and it's wonderful what you're doing. And I would imagine there's also veggie vegan teachers who aren't, they have to teach some curriculum, and this
Mm-hmm.
is not appealing to them. So I'm curious then, how would teachers contact you? And is this happening across Canada, or
Mm-hmm.
in BC, or, it sounds like it's snowballing. It's becoming a big project for you folks.
It is, it is. So in terms of people who would love to connect with our resources and what we offer, of course, we're in the middle of the pandemic and schools are closed for the rest of the year. So we are now offering online classes. They're public and they're free, and they're every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 o'clock. That is, so our website is www.animalsinscience.org. And then to access our full course schedule and to register for whatever class you want to take in May and June, to that URL you would add /online-classes. And I can send you that if you want to afterwards, so you can post it alongside the video maybe. I don't know.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that would be like May and June this year that we're offering those free public classes, and then we're also taking private teacher bookings during this time as well on Wednesdays, and that can be booked through our calendar. We can't offer those for free, unfortunately, because we need to also make sure that our program is sustainable in the future. But there are some creative ways that teachers have found to get funding for those classes. Like, even if it's just asking, each parent for $4, it's yeah. And we would never turn anyone down, but we need to make sure that our program is sustainable.
Right. And so, you say that the schools are closed. They are, but teaching is still happening.
Absolutely.
And my understanding is, I'm not called into the schools at this point. I work as a spare board employee, so I'm kind of low down on the list of people. But my understanding is that the teachers are working from their classrooms, and some are utilizing Zoom
Yep.
with their students, and then others are kind of FaceTiming with their students,
Yep.
or whatever. So it seems like now, teachers are becoming more and more familiar with different types of technology and alternatives. It seems like a perfect time to.
Yes, it really is. I think that you've just touched on something that has been like a very, very unexpected silver lining to this pandemic for a charity like us. The first is that teachers getting more well-versed with video conferencing software and leaning into online teaching in ways that they probably haven't never been faced with before, and understanding that it can be successful. And I know that we, for many reasons, might want to limit screen time with kids, but for our program to be expanded across Canada, like, we're a super small charity, we're a team of 2, and we're based in Vancouver, but we have lofty goals and we want to offer our programs across Canada. And so the best way to do that is to do an online class with us through Zoom, right? And they've been very successful so far. We make them as engaging as we can, and the students have loved them so far. The other thing is that you can't do a real animal dissection in your classroom right now, because guess what? You can't have your students in the classroom with you. And so the teachers who, some of them who have been wanting to offer dissections, have reached out to us to say, hey, what are the apps that I can use to teach this content without the animal specimen? And so this kind of, we're perhaps reaching people that we wouldn't have reached because it's just out of the necessity of the issue. And what I'm hoping is that those teachers in particular don't go back to using real animals. They see the value because they have a lived experience of using apps now, and they know that they can teach successfully using them. And so in lots of ways, it's just forced their hand to explore the technologies that are available to them. And I'm really hoping that it makes, it encourages teachers who maybe wouldn't explore their options with us because they're so wedded to doing real animal dissection. It just helps them along their path a little bit so that they don't switch back once they get in-person classes up and running again.
Oh, I didn't, somehow I escaped having to do any dissections until college. And then I think it was a snake. And all I remember is the smell of the formaldehyde was,
yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine as a teacher that you would refuse alternatives just on that basis alone. So let's talk about some of the tools then. I think on your website it lists like mannequins. There's virtual, there's virtual, and then CT scan data. Can you just give us an idea what those things are?
Yeah, I can show you. Actually, I have some things right next to me. So in terms of models, I put my frog away from the workshop, but I have this little guy sat next to me who is, it's a paper frog dissection, and he comes just organs, and you cut them out, and then you stick your frog together. And this is a female frog, and you can get different sexes, so you can get male frogs as well. And you basically you put your frog together, and they look very rudimentary, right? They look kind of like for, you know, elementary, intermediate, but you can see that there's actually a bunch of numbers, and it's labeled, there's a legend that this is created by 2 science teachers, and the legend is really detailed. And so the actual anatomical detail that they go into is really impressive. So it's not just this cartoony little like kindergarten frog, it's actually really high level educationally. But it allows, what I love about this is that it upends the usual, we're going to take our frog apart. In this case, you're actually putting them together, and the psychological flip of that, I think, is actually quite lovely. Like, you're building your frog, and so there's an interesting psychology there for that. And this is, I want to give them a shout out because I just love these teachers. Their company name is Getting Nerdy with Mel and Gertie. And they're 2 science teachers in the US. They have put an immense amount of time and effort into developing these products. The frog isn't the only thing that they offer. They offer tons of these different paper dissections. They've got vertebrates are frogs, rats, pigs, cats, dogs, birds, snake, shark. And then they've also got the invertebrates. So they've got your sea stars and grasshopper, earthworm, clam, lots of other little critters, and they've got some human anatomy tools as well. So they have an eye, a paper eye dissection, which is great for the students who maybe want another option instead of cow's eye dissection, which is a very popular practice in classrooms. I can also, would it be too distracting on the interview to do a screen share? Or
let's try. I've never done one. Yeah, sure.
Okay,
let's give it a try.
Let's see how it goes. Simply because I can show you some really neat tools. I know we've just got a little bit of time left.
I'm not in any rush, so no problem.
All right, so let me do, oh, I don't think I can screen share you on this particular Zoom platform that I have, because I'm not the host.
Right. Is there a way I can?
Yeah, Zoom have updated their security policies so that I think it needed to be in your meeting settings ahead of time. That's okay.
Oh,
I can show you. I can show you just like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is, it'll be mirrored, I think, might be backwards for everybody, but this is Frogopedia. So for younger kids,
it's just hitting your microphone a little bit there.
Oh, sorry.
That's good. That's okay. There you go.
Yeah, this is Frogopedia.
Oh, I see. Okay. So that's a fertilized egg, it says?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
my gosh.
growing my frog over time. So for the kids that you're teaching about frog life cycles, it's very beautiful graphics and imagery. Let's see if I can adjust my screen a little more. There we go. That's probably better. So that's Frogopedia. It also has an AR anatomy function. So you can actually, it operates in an augmented reality way. So it looks like a real frog appears on your desk, and then you can explore the anatomy that way, but it's a living, breathing frog, right? So it's not teaching from this place of like dead frog. Right, for those two functions. There is a dissection function where it's a virtual dissection, but I think if you did these two things first, at least you're able to say, this is who this frog was when we're doing the dissection. And it's also not a real frog, it's all computer generated imagery. So that's called Frogopedia. That's its little logo, this one.
Awesome. Yeah.
My favorite ones too are these ones called 3D Anatomy, and they've got a whole bunch of different species. This is by Biosphera. So here's my frog here, and there's no dissection on this, so there's no simulated cutting at all. My frog moves around, and say I put frog on their back right here, and then these buttons down the side just take away different body systems. So if I take the skin away, there's the frog skeleton. And then let's say we're interested in the digestive system. So you can see that we can like zoom in on the digestive system and learn all about that, and we can look at it from different angles. So if you were doing a real frog dissection, you would only look in through the belly, but this allows you to see the situation of organs from any perspective in the body. So it adds that element of 3D learning. And I love these apps in terms of inclusivity, and I know that so many products are developed in English, and our Francophone teachers or French immersion teachers are just so stuck for content sometimes, right? They're stuck for tools like this. These have French translations built in. So I'll show you the rat one. Same company, same tool, just with a different critter. And you can see here, I've already got the rat set to French. So this is a French rat, and all of the instructions and all of the body parts are in French. And so they also have other languages. So there's Latin, Spanish, Japanese, and Portuguese as well. So if you have, you know, we don't want like to assume that everyone is a native English speaker. So
cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
So these are just some, it gives you an idea.
Right.
I don't want to take up more time, but
no, it's beautiful. I mean, because I haven't been in the schools very long, and I haven't witnessed any dissections, but what I have witnessed are salmon spawning situations. Just about every school, just before spring break when we all left, had aquariums that were boxed in, and they were sprouting eggs, I guess, which I guess it's a nice thing to do. I've heard that the success rate of that sort of salmon breeding program is very minimal, and to me, it's not a natural environment. Yeah. As a vegan, I just shy away from any form of animal exploitation like that. The other thing that I've seen are chickens. They'll bring eggs in and hatch the chickens. So are there alternatives to that too? And how do you feel about those sorts of processes in the school?
I have a tendency to agree with you. I mean, salmon, if we think about who salmon are, they're migratory. They migrate to spawn. And so when we're keeping them in one place and asking them to spawn in one place, why would they do that, right? So I feel like we need to really fully understand who these animals are before we go ahead and try and ask them to fit in with our programs and our environments. Same with chicks. Like, chicks have this natural behavior where when they are first born, the first thing they see is usually their mother. And so there's this hardwired neurobiological process that's called imprinting. And so they imprint onto their mother, who is usually the first person they see. But when you're hatching chicks in the classroom, these little chicks become imprinted onto whoever. And then what happens is, if you take them away from whoever it is that they're imprinted on too soon, before a natural weaning process would happen, And that's actually really distressing for them, because they're imprinted onto this person that they think is their mom, right? And so it's actually this very, very well documented neurobiological phenomenon among certain animals like chickens. And birds in particular are very strong imprinters. And so that's something to think about. So even if you have the best of intentions and you want your kids to learn about real chicks, and you make sure that the chicks all go to like a farm sanctuary afterwards, who knows, they're still going to be in that distress from being imprinted onto someone who isn't their mom. And so I think we need to put aside our hubris and understand animals for who they are really, and then be really honest about, is this actually a suitable animal to have in a classroom? So I think animal interactions can be incredibly educational. I think they can be really valuable, but they need to be done very mindfully and always in an animal-centered way. And so yeah, the chicks and the salmon spawning don't really cover those bases for me.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, you know, in a lot of different ways. The kids, of course, love it, you know, any opportunity to interact with animals, and they don't necessarily understand that this is completely artificial, and that there's all these stresses that are happening and that sort of thing. I think it would be more fun to just take them all to a farm sanctuary.
Yeah, why not?
Right. Yeah. And see them in their natural environment. Personally, I think that would be a good thing. But I'm not a teacher. I don't make those decisions. But I appreciate that you have a similar perspective on that. So teachers can then, or any educators, I guess, you work with the public school, the private schools, colleges and universities.
We do college and university level stuff, yeah. Our hope is in the future we would actually replicate the Humane Science Education program that we currently have for K through 12, and we would replicate that to be like a university level specific program. And the reason it needs to be a separate program is that there's just different stakeholders and influences of change, and it's just a little bit different. Like there's no Ministry of Education for universities, there's no school boards for universities to kind of do any top-down policy stuff with. And so the university education, there's just different like agents of change. So we would make it a separate program, but we certainly currently are thinking, yes, that we would go in a university direction in the future. In the meantime, if university educators want to get in touch, I would always do my best to answer their questions, for sure.
And I would imagine, I think my understanding is that teachers can pretty much create the type of classroom that they want to create. They have a lot of power in determining the curriculum. And so if a parent maybe is listening and they would prefer, they could contact teachers and school boards and that sort of thing as well.
So under our School Act in British Columbia, the minister can't tell teachers how to do their jobs. He can't be prescriptive over teaching methods. So if you, people who've been teaching for a long time, or parents who have known about curriculum for a long time, there's been actually a transition in the curriculum to being less prescriptive. There's no line item in the current curriculum that says students need to perform safe, competent dissection. They used to be in there, and now it's not. Now it's like, here's your learning goals, body systems, anatomy, adaptation to function, and how you get there with your students is actually at teacher discretion. So there's a lot of power in that, for sure, especially for grassrootsy movements like this, where I hope that teachers care about educational experiences, cost savings, and inclusivity, and environmental stuff. But I think that, teachers can choose their own learning modalities with their students. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I would never want to take that away.
Right. And just the practicality, we don't know what the future is going to be or what the new normal might look like. So the ability to incorporate this into their curriculum seems really powerful. And the most successful classrooms that I've been in, the advantage of being a Sphere Board is I get to be in a lot of different classrooms. And certainly the most successful are, from what I can witness of the students' engagement, and I've mostly worked with young students, is some combination of screen time learning and teacher learning. There seems to be that balance, that they seem to really jive with that.
Yes.
Just from a behavior point of view, they're more cooperative, they're more willing to participate. So
I fully agree.
Yeah.
And so when we deliver guest classes, the way it goes is that, especially for younger kids, like you said, if we're doing a multi-species class, for example, we would set up a frog station and a rat station and a pig human station. We divide the class into 3, and they have self-directed learning for 10 minutes. And for 10 minutes, they can be as loud as they want. They can use whatever screens they want. They can choose their own adventure. They can really just, we have worksheets that keep them on task, and we circulate to make sure there's no like dissolving into chatting about their weekend or their own interpersonal stuff that's going on, who knows, with kids. And then what happens is they all go to each station. So they have 10 minutes and then we switch and then we switch. And then at the end, we bring them together for a conversation about what they learned. Like, tell me, you teach us about what you learned in the last 45 minutes. And they're so willing and eager to share what they learned and what they were excited about. And it's really helped us refine our classes because it's student-centered. We know what works for them because we've asked, and then anything that doesn't work for them and they don't engage with, we've taken it off our stations, right? So I agree that the mixture of like self-directed or screen time and then more formal teacher time, fully agree. Yeah.
Diversity, the earth loves diversity in
Yes.
all aspects. It sounds like a fantastic program. I'm going to tell all my friends for sure.
Oh, thank you.
And so looking ahead then, I see you've got a strategic plan that you've just published that heads into 2022. So do you want to talk about, sounds like you're very busy and you're in the exact perfect place right now. What do you see for the organization moving forward?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I'll be honest that the pandemic has like halted, paused, made us pivot on a certain number of things. The Humane Science Education Program, future visions, basically just solidify everything that we're doing, expand our work across the country by offering these online classes. One particular thing that we really, really want to do is do more student engagement, like for policy change. Like, students are the agents of change here. The school board trustees that make decisions on those student choice policies, which we didn't really talk about, but you know, for student choice policies to be enacted, me asking is worthless. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a parent, I'm not a constituent in that school district, I'm not you know, a student. So I'm not someone who school board trustees work for. The school board trustees work for the students. So when the students when the students ask for change, they have more power than they realize. And so our aim is to just be the container for that and to really start a bit of a like student ambassador program and formalize that so that students who are maybe vegan students or students who just care about animals, students who care about their science learning, can actually have a community where they're saying like, hey, I got a policy win in my district, here's how I did it, and share their resources and their own knowledge amongst themselves. That's a big piece of what we're going to be doing moving forward. And then we'll be doing a lot more work on the research and testing side of things. So I'm an educator at UBC. I just finished teaching a class on non-animal methods in biomedicine. It's the first class of its kind to be offered in Canada and certainly at UBC. And so we want to see that course be permanently listed. It was kind of a trial run this year. It was very successful. So now we have kind of the proofs in the pudding, proof of principle, to ask for it to be listed as a permanent course in the undergraduate programming for science students at UBC.
And that was well received, was it?
It was, yeah. It was such a fun class. My students were amazing, and their projects were just so fascinating to read. And I had the privilege of having some, you know, world leaders just join us on Zoom calls like this to teach my students from remote places, even before the lockdown. We had, you know, people from Europe who work for the agency that creates the guidelines call in and tell us about computational models and what's happening in Europe. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot during the process, and definitely ready to refine it and offer it again next year. That course, I give them a shout out to. That course is funded at the moment by the BC Foundation for Non-Animal Research, who are a local little group who they've been very supportive of us, and they were particularly interested in supporting that undergraduate experience, that undergraduate course. And then I mentioned at the very beginning that there's no legislation for animals in science in Canada, and that's another thing that's in our strategic plan to change. It wasn't so explicitly said in our strategic plan, but we definitely wanted to be, because we're a small group and we're not near our central legislature in Ottawa, we want to be honest about our limits for doing that government relations work. But we definitely want to be knowledge brokers so that the people who are in positions to do that work can lean on us, and we will definitely, provide places for people to come together. And so to that end, March 5th and 6th this year in Toronto, we co-hosted a legal change workshop with Animal Justice and the Canadian Centre for Alternatives to Animal Methods, where we invited lawyers from across the country and scientists and animal advocates, and there were I believe there were like between 15 and 18 people in total, where we brought people together to map out realistic paths for legislative change. Change is a weird word because we don't have any legislation to change, but to kind of maybe put in requests for bills and legislation, whether that's federally or provincially. And so I'm not at liberty to talk about what was discussed at that group yet, because it's very early days, but the plan is to produce some kind of white paper, and the right people were at the table, I believe. So we'll be asking people to join in due course to get that work done. But that's work that we cannot do alone, so it needs everybody.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're stronger together. So
yeah,
buzzword these days. And I talk to people who tell me they're bored. It doesn't sound like you're bored at all during this pandemic.
Oh, I'm the opposite of bored. I've been the busiest that I've ever been, and also like no separation between home and work feels very weird for me. It's like I'm a self-confessed workaholic, and so it's not a good trait. I'm not congratulating myself at all. I just find it hard to switch off when there's all this work to do that I'm passionate about. So, yay, work boundaries.
Sometimes it's nice to, if you love what you're doing, it's awesome to be able to just immerse yourself in it. It is important to take that time for yourself when you can.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Elisabeth, I really appreciate you taking the time today to tell us all this wonderful information. Your website is very thorough, the Animals in Science Policy Institute, and it's animalsinscience.org. I imagine that you accept donations. You mentioned that you're a charity, so they're tax deductible.
We are a registered charity. Everything is tax deductible. And I will just be super frank that at this time of pandemic, like a lot of foundation money is being shifted from causes like this to healthcare. That's rightfully so. But we really, we're going to need the donor help moving forward. It's a vulnerable position for small charities to be in, for sure. And it's right that, funding should be put into our healthcare at the moment. But there are other charities still doing good work. So if our work resonates with folks, we absolutely welcome donations at this time. We're going to be part of Giving Tuesday next week because it's been moved to May 5th. And you can also become a member of the society as well. So membership is $30 a year. And if you give us volunteer hours, I think 10 volunteer hours a year, then you get to vote in our annual general meeting. And then you also have the platform to run to be on our board of directors as well. So there's a membership option, donation options. And if, I understand people are struggling right now too. So if donation or membership's not an option, then show us some love on social media so we can find more people like you. That would be amazing. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the usual places.
Right. And what kind of what kind of work would volunteers do for you?
Yeah, so we have a communications team. So it'd be things like, you know, if you have a creative little spirit, then doing graphic design to create social media posts for us, blog post writing if you're a really good writer and you want some experience. We do have a policy research team that will be more active in the summer, because at the moment we're really focused on delivering that online content for our Humane Science Education program. But the policy work won't stop, and so we want to be ready for policy work in September. So, you know, just policy research over the summer, that'd be great. We, you know, digital marketing, like if anyone is good at website stuff, then we always welcome people who can use WordPress and just make changes to our website as needed. So there's lots to do. I mean, running an organization is like, you know, doing the job of 7 people. So volunteers are very worthwhile.
It's a great place to get some experience.
It is. And so, yeah, I have a program coordinator called Nicole, and she takes on the bulk of doing volunteer coordinating for the Humane Science Education program, and she's a very valuable person to know for, I'm going to guess, for people in this community. She's a graduate of UBC's Environment and Sustainability program, and she does youth facilitation volunteering with students who go to the UN. So she's a very, very influential person to know if anyone ever wants to kind of go drop the mic at the UN over sustainable development goals.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Wow. What a great team that you've got
Very
going
good.
there.
Yeah. And our board of directors are amazing. Yeah, we've got a good team behind us. We are steadfast in weathering the storm of COVID-19 in the best way that we can.
Right.
And we will hopefully still be around next year to keep on doing this work.
Oh, yeah. I hope so. It's so
Yeah.
important. I'm definitely going to pass the word amongst all my teachers and educational assistant friends that I can, because it sounds like it's good for the kids, it's good for the bank account, it's good for the animals.
Yeah, I feel like as an advocacy issue, dissection is so winnable. It's win-win-win. There's no downside. No one loses out if we end dissection tomorrow. We can and we should. And if we end it tomorrow, no one loses out, except for maybe the people who make money off of selling animals for dissection. But then they can also tap into the alternatives market. So there's an option for them. We're not cutting them off, you know, from making money. So.
Yeah, so while you bring that up, where do these animals come from?
Such an interesting question, yes, which we didn't get to, but so some animals are wild caught. So some frogs, fish, like dogfish, are usually bycatch from inhumane fishing industries. Some animals are from the food production system. So fetal pigs, for example, would come from the food production system. And then some animals are purpose bred. And it is my understanding currently that a lot of the suppliers are unregulated. So there's rats and some frogs and other species would be purpose bred, specifically to live and die for the purpose of being on your dissection tray. So they don't, you know, the animals used for dissection, if they're purpose bred, they probably don't live well, and in all circumstances they don't die well. And so it's an animal welfare issue, it's an animal rights issue, and it's an unnecessary harmful practice that I think not only harms animals, but it harms children's humanity, because we're asking them to shelve their empathy in the name of science, and I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. I really appreciate you taking the time.
You're so welcome.
For all the work that you're doing.